All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for tuning in today. I'm very excited about the discussion that we will have today on police reform with our panelists, whom I'd also like to thank for joining us for this very important conversation. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Catherine Neal Harris. I am the Alfred C. LaSalle III Fellow in Drug Policy at the Baker Institute, and I will be moderating today's discussion. This webinar is sponsored by the Baker Institute Drug Policy Program, and it's offered in collaboration with the Institute's Center for Health and Biosciences. And it's the second in a series of discussions about the criminal justice system, racial equity, and public health. This series was prompted by George Floyd's killing and the ensuing protests. The problems that were highlighted by those protests are not new, and people have been calling for criminal justice reforms for decades. But our current moment might be different in its potential to bring about real and long-lasting change. And we hope that in the tragedies of the pandemic and the killings of George Floyd and so many others, that we can find opportunity for consensus around public health and criminal justice reforms that are pragmatic and equitable. This conversation is going to focus on one of those areas of reform, which is policing. And in a moment, I will introduce our panelists, who will each talk for about 10 minutes, and then we'll turn it over to questions from our viewers. If you have questions while the speakers are talking, please submit them using the Q&A function in Zoom as we go along, and they will be asked when the speakers are done presenting. And again, please make sure to use the Q&A function and not the chat function. So without further ado, let me introduce you to our panelists. I'll mention that Chief Art Acevedo is also supposed to be joining us today. He hasn't signed in yet. Oh, I think he's coming in a second. I'll wait for him to get up, and I'll go ahead and I'll introduce Representative Nicole Collier. She's an attorney and small business owner. She is the first woman to represent House District 95 in Tarrant County. And in November 2018, she was reelected for her 4th term in office. Representative Collier serves as chair of the Criminal Jurisprudence Committee and is the vice chair of the Texas Legislative Black Caucus. Rob Kenter is the Director of Law Enforcement Field Engagement at the Center for Policing Equity, which is a nonprofit research and think tank. He holds a PhD in public administration from the School of Public Service at Old Dominion University in Norfolk, Virginia, which is also my alma mater, and my time there with Rob, we overlapped. And Dr. Kenter served over 30 years with the Norfolk Police Department before retiring in 2020. And Art Acevedo, thank you for joining us. He is the chief of the Houston Police Department, and he has held that role since 2016. Prior to that, he served 9 years as the chief of the Austin Police Department. He migrated with his family from Cuba to the US when he was 4 years old and grew up in California, where he started his law enforcement career with the California Highway Patrol. And now I'll turn it over to you, Chief Acevedo, and you can start us off.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. Thank you all for inviting me. It's really great to be on such a distinguished panel, and especially a panel that's being put on for the Baker Institute, which is, it's an iconic institution, and we're happy to be here. This is some challenging times, but I really believe that challenges bring opportunities. And I think the opportunity we have in front of us is one that we can't waste that opportunity. We need to do some. We need to be thoughtful about what's coming up, especially in the next session of the legislature and in the Congress, and we need to enact some reform that is badly needed, but it has to be comprehensive. And I look forward to being part of the conversation, as do my colleagues in the Major State Chiefs Association.
Okay, and thank you, Chief Acevedo, for that. I will now turn it over to Representative Collier for your comments.
Okay, I'm sorry. Do I talk for just a little bit, or?
Oh, everybody had about 10 minutes to speak.
Okay.
I don't know. Yeah. Oh,
okay.
As Chief Acevedo, did you have more that you wanted to say?
You know what? I will let my representative go, and then I will yield to her, and then when everybody's, I'll be more than happy to jump back on. That's, we're just saying an opening hello, but I'll wait for my representative to go.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Chief. I appreciate that. Thank you guys so much for allowing me to be here to share some information about what we're doing at the state level in terms of policing. This has been an ongoing issue. This is not the first time that we have tried to address making changes in how police are recruited, hired, and held accountable. This has been ongoing for years, and we are really working hard. And unfortunately, due to the murder of George Floyd, this is the opportunity that we have to make change, because there is more conviction in the hearts of people that serve to make a difference, to make a change in this policy. And so working with various stakeholders like yourself, law enforcement, and people who are impacted, that's just everybody in the community impacted by interactions with police, we can do this. So there are key areas that we need to focus on. Of course, recruiting and hiring law enforcement officers. You know, what type of officer? Not everybody is fit or qualified to be a law enforcement officer. Where are we recruiting officers? I've heard time and time again that we need more diversity within law enforcement departments. Also, there's a culture, is what I'm being told by community activists within the department that needs to be changed. We have heard legislation being brought forth that says, if you see something that's not right, you must say something that's right. But there's a code within the police department that you don't want to be a snitch. This could be inherent. And from our growing up, you know, snitches get stitches is what people have always said before. But we need to be able to enact and promote a discussion about what is wrong. You know, we have to have more transparency and trust within law enforcement offices. So those are things that we want to keep pushing in terms of implicit bias training. This is something that Chair Garnett Coleman has always been working for. It was in the original Sandra Bland Act, and it got removed. But because and as a result of this George Floyd murder, the Texas Commission on Law Enforcement has already implemented a implicit bias training course. So that's something that's going to be available now, but we are going to codify it come during the next legislative session. So we've talked about some of the bills that we want to bring forth. Ms. Sinfronia Thompson, Chair of Public Health, and one of the longest serving members in the Texas legislature, filed a bill last session that dealt with the use of force. So we need to come up with a standard definition, because what her bill said that use of force should only be used in imminent threats. And so that is what we want to look forward to. Now, I heard this, I've been talking to my community about defunding the police, but you know, that is a reflection, in my opinion, of the sentiments felt, how fed up certain people are with what they are having, the interactions that they have and what they see from their local police department. So I don't think that they, you know, some people really may be extreme to defund the police, but it's like reimagining what you guys have talked about, reimagining how law enforcement is created, enforced, and implemented within our communities. So yes, maybe we need to look at reallocating funding, demilitarizing our police, creating standards across the board when you're talking about the use of force, and look at these training modules that they have. Is the psychological training enough? And let me tell you, we need more community interaction. There's been legislation that has been filed to talk about a community oversight board with subpoena power. That's something that we want to look at as well. But I've talked to my community, and there's some that don't even want to go to the table. We've got to get people back to the table and willing to make a commitment to work with law enforcement. Some people are just saying that they're fed up, they've been misled and by misguided policy, police policy that has left them misunderstood. So we need to make sure that we are promoting and getting people willingly to come back to the table to talk to law enforcement about how they can collectively work to promote safety in the communities. Another thing is, I believe that we have our law enforcement doing too much. We expect more from them. They need to work collaboratively with other healthcare professionals. And when we're talking about mental health, perhaps the 911 operator can field the call to the appropriate entity. Maybe it's not law enforcement. We're asking them to be social workers on top of law enforcement officers. So let's look at investing in healthcare. We're not going to change crime when you create the most advantageous atmosphere for it. When you have pawn shops, when you have loan companies, when you have payday lenders in the same community as a bunch of liquor stores, car washes, you're going to create an atmosphere for crime in certain circumstances. And unless we can have more people educated with opportunities for employment, skills, whatever it is, but we have to give the people the right to live in dignity and respect everyone as they move forward. So we have to take a comprehensive approach to policing. It's not just fix what's inside of the law enforcement. It's about fixing or addressing all of us, because we all need to have that opportunity to be ourselves and improve with one another. So I think that when we're talking about law enforcement policing, we can't just talk about policing. We've got to talk about education. We've got to talk about economic opportunities. We've got to talk about healthcare. All those go hand in hand with policing and what we expect. And so they're only, not every law enforcement officer is, commits misconduct, but it's those few that do, that we all pay attention to, and we want to see a change. So, those are things that we want to continue to work on. We've got a lot of members in the Texas Legislative Black Caucus who are working on policy to help promote change, and we're willing to work with our stakeholders in law enforcement to do that. Oh, and another thing I forgot to mention is data. We need to have improved data collection. Right now, we've just got a hodgepodge of information that is being put together, and it's not collaborative. It's not in one piece. So we have to kind of go one place to get one information and another place to get another. So unless we have a comprehensive look at the data, we're not going to know and be able to pinpoint some of those areas. I've got some other things that I can mention as well, but I'll yield the floor to somebody else.
Thank you, Representative Collier, for those comments. And I'm sure we'll be able to follow up on a lot of that in the Q&A. And now, Chief Acevedo, I'll turn it back over to you if you want to say some comments as well, and then we'll finish up with Rob Cantor.
Hi, everybody. I'm back. My doctor called me right in the middle of that. Sorry about that. The representative is spot on a lot of the issues that she brought up. We have got to take this opportunity with the tragic murder of George Floyd and look at our entire law enforcement system. But we got to take it beyond law enforcement, because what's going on in our country right now, I just had the privilege of testifying on the president's commission on law enforcement last week, representing the Major State Chiefs Association. I think that we're all in as a profession, at least legitimate police departments and police chiefs are all in to do everything we can to make and move the profession forward. But the problem is that law enforcement is just one cog of the criminal justice system. And we have got to bring transparency, not just to law enforcement, which is, rightfully so. We're the most scrutinized, probably, profession in the country. We should be. But we have to look at what's going on with prosecutors and what's going on with judges and what's going on in the courthouses and what's going on with the failure to really invest in education and housing and economic opportunity and a lot of other things, just like from the defending piece. For every one of these calls that we go to where things go wrong as it relates to someone in psychological, suffering from psychological emergency induced either by an emotional illness, a psychological illness, or drugs or alcohol, or combination of all three, but people in an altered state of mind. For everyone that goes wrong, that one is one too many, we have very many that do go right, like here in Houston, where we're actually have a unit that our mental health division that actually responds with civilian mental health providers. We have a desk at our at our communication center, where we actually have mental health professionals that actually divert law enforcement from going to these calls in the first place. So there's a lot of things that need to be done, but it cannot just be done by the police. You know, some of the things that we have to do with some of the rights that almost have been given too many rights to our police officers. We want them to have protections, because one of the things we have to be careful about is, remember that law enforcement has a very ugly history of, you know, we were the arm of the government that would go capture slaves and bring them back into those horrific conditions. You know, we were the arm during the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s that brutalized John Lewis and others. And so the reason part of the reason that was happening is that law enforcement in too many communities was completely a political arm of a mayor and council. And the problem with that, when you don't have somewhat of a separation, we don't want law enforcement to become a tool again, like it has been used in throughout history. So we've got to be thoughtful. We have to be comprehensive. We have to be evidence-based. We don't want, and I don't think our community here in Houston, Texas, where I have the privilege of working under the mayor and Sylvester Turner, the city council, that understands that communities of color here in the most diverse city in the country, they don't want less policing in these communities that are being afflicted by violent crime every day. They want better policing. They want less bad policing. They don't want to have to leverage their safety for the government to make the investments in pre-K education and public education and job programs and work programs and economic investment. You know, because let's face it, when we start doing things, what I believe is it's really a false equivalence. You've got to give up A to achieve B. You know, it's not communities like River Oaks where you know, the affluent are paying for constable patrols and River Oak patrol, and they live behind gated communities and big walls. The impact's going to be felt when we do things willy-nilly in terms of public safety, without it being an evidence-based and comprehensive and thoughtful approach. It's going to be the communities that are sadly already being impacted most disproportionately, not just by in instances where the police don't do the right thing, but also by everyday crime at a much greater rate, and with many more instances than any type of police violence. And so we've got to stand up for those communities. So what's happening in our cities right now is that there are some that are using COVID, they're using you know, the Black Lives Matter movement, they're using legitimate protests against bad policing and unlawful policing as an opportunity to really start coddling some very violent individuals in society. And you can do both. And what worries me, to be really honest with everybody, is that when we see, as of this morning in Houston, Texas, murder is up by 39%. When we see 1,500 individuals that have been charged with murder that haven't gone to the trial, many of them that are running free, because there are those that say that no one should be held pre-conviction, regardless of their criminal history, their propensity for violence, their propensity to reoffend, and regardless of what kind of threat they may pose to the public. So there's a lot going on right now in this state and in this country. And I think that as we move forward, we have got to shine the light on all parts of society, on all parts of government, and just not on the police, because when you still have in this state, remember that police chiefs don't negotiate the contracts, and and police departments aren't the ones that do contracts. It's elected officials that negotiate contracts. And when we have to, I can see an officer looking at their own body-worn camera, but when we have to, by law and agreements, actually show officers that have been accused of some pretty egregious acts, they get to see what everybody else has said, all the other videos, all the evidence. You know, I think that's a little bit much. And so not to mention the fact that under 143 of the of Section 143 in this state, we have 180 days from the date of occurrence of an act of misconduct to take action. Well, why should we reward individuals that hide misconduct? And why? And I really would hope that the legislature would change that to 180 days from day of discovery. We shouldn't reward people for hiding misconduct. It should be from 180 days from date of actual discovery. When did the department discover it? When did the complainant come in? And those are the things that I think that we need to be working on. Let's say one last thing on civilian oversight. I've had in Austin, we had a certain level of civilian oversight. They did not have, with the Office of Police Monitor and the Citizens Review Panel, did not have subpoena power, but they did have the ability to ask for take things back for additional questioning, for additional information, to look at some other piece of evidence. They got to review everything from in these cases. We have the same thing here in Houston, but just be real. My only caution would be this: people don't understand that sometimes civilians can be more forgiving of bad policing at times, because people in general want to support their police officers than police chiefs. So we have to be very careful that we don't falsely start thinking that if you just put civilians in charge, that's going to be a Pandora's box or a perfect solution. Because I can promise you that with the committees that I've dealt with, and including grand juries that I've testified before after deadly police encounters where I thought that our officer would end up being indicted. I actually felt that he would have been indicted over the years, and they're not indicted. People are very forgiving, so we've got to be very careful that we don't take away a police chief's ability to actually hold people accountable, because in places where that's happened, in LA being one of them, it has created problems. So I look forward to the session. I hope that the representative and others, I've been talking to John Whitmire, the dean on the Senate, on some of these issues, and I hope that we actually make some real change coming up starting in January.
Thank you, Chief Acevedo, for your comments. And I will now turn it over to Dr. Kenter to give his thoughts.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much, Chief. I know the Chief is familiar with the work at the Center for Police and Equity. We've worked with him very closely in the past. Thank you very much, Representative Collier. What you've said is spot on. And it's not often when three people have all their messages aligned like we do today. Just for a little background for everyone, the Center for Police and Equity, we've partnered with over 25 police departments nationwide, and we have the largest database of police behavior, right? So we use that data to identify disparities in police behavior. We collect data on pedestrian stops, vehicle stops, and use of force. We analyze that data, we identify disparities, and then we produce a report that goes back to the police departments that gives recommendations on strategies they can take to reduce the portion of those disparities that they own, right? So we use advanced regression analysis to identify what portions of those disparities are identified through socio-demographic things, and what portion is owned by police departments through their policy and behavior. So in a nutshell, if we can measure it, we can fix it, right? And that goes back to what the representative said about collecting data. Oftentimes, we don't have complete data sets from police departments. They don't have electronic data systems. And we're not talking about the large and major city departments. Some of the medium-sized and small departments really don't have the right data captured in their systems to be analyzed correctly. So that's what we do at the Center for Police and Equity. You know, our position is on defunding a police department. It's not about reducing the amount of police officers as much as it is investing in those Black and brown communities that have been disinvested in over the years. Just like the Chief said, we want to reduce the footprint of police in those spaces that they don't deserve to be in, right? And we want to give it back to the people the best people for those services. Mental health is the big one, right? Homelessness, addiction, things like that. The police don't, that's not their space. We want to give it back to the proper people. But you have to keep in mind that while the street level capacity to handle those social service issues may be there or maybe there shortly, it's that upstream capacity. The bigger capacity of health and human services has to keep up with the street level demand, because the less you use a jail as a mental health institution and you want to put them into the right system, right? The system's capacity has to keep up with that. And that's going to be an issue across this country. We've seen it here in Virginia, and I'm sure in Texas they have the same thing. We just spoke to people in New Mexico. The system capacity isn't going to keep up. So, well, just like the other two have said, when we're talking about defunding the police, we're not talking about taking cops off the street. We're talking about when you call 911, the right person responds to your call for service. If you have a mental health issue, we're going to get mental health people out there. If you're a homeless person, we're not going to send a cop. We're going to send someone who can offer the services from the homelessness advocacy groups. And anything else will be doing a disservice to those Black and brown communities that need the services most. So we're not talking about removing police departments and police officers from the cities, because we feel you would be abandoning those communities. What we really like to see is people use their hotspot policing, right? They use evidence-based strategies to address violent crime. Right? Focused deterrence is a evidence-based strategy. Not only hotspot, but those hot people in those hotspots, right? You got to get away from that 1990 scorched earth policing style where you're the hotspot, and then you stop and frisk everyone you see, instead of the actual people who are committing the crime, the most violent of the violent people. That's an efficient way of looking at police work, right? So we're talking about creating efficiencies in the system, going into your data systems, your call for service, and identifying what doesn't belong to the police department, who can we give that to, and then we can create efficiencies by responding to those calls that are in our wheelhouse, right? Those violent calls of service. And you're going to see a big reduction in crime if you can pull that off. So at the end of the day, it's reducing encounters with police and increasing encounters with the right person in the government that can help you. And anything else I say is just going to rehash exactly what's represented and the chief said. These are things it's system wide. It's not just the police. It's not a police problem. However, I'm not saying the police haven't created problems for themselves, but it's a system-wide problem, and governments have to deal with that. And we're not saying do it immediately. You have to create those capacities in the system that you're going to hand it off to, or else you create more harm. Thank you, Katie.
Thank you, Rob, and thank you to Chief Acevedo and Nicole and Representative Collier for your comments. We have lots of questions, so I'll start getting to those immediately. The first one is directed to you, Representative Collier. One of our viewers asked if you could give us an idea of what is on the agenda for next year's legislative session in terms of reforms.
Sure. Okay, thank you for that question. Excellent question. This is something that I believe that we have the ability to get done this upcoming session. You know, in light of the pandemic, we're going to have a shorter budget, but a lot of these measures that we can implement won't require funding. So this is an opportunity for us to do this. Unlike it has been in the past, I think people feel convicted again to do these things and make a change in law enforcement. And then hopefully the law enforcement unions will continue to work with us in promoting these changes as well. So we definitely have quite a few concepts that are in the works to address law enforcement and policing and interactions with the community. So of course, redefining use of excessive force. There's been a push for a bill that's been passed in Colorado that would limit qualified immunity. That's something that people are very interested in, holding officers accountable for their bad acts. Right now, if they are under in the course and scope of their employment, they may not be civilly liable. Now, they can be criminally liable, but can they be civilly liable, and not in Texas? So there was a legislation passed in Colorado that would open that up. So that's something that we have members that are looking at as well. In addition to the use of force. So we saw in Austin, in Dallas, we saw law enforcement interacting with those who were exercising their First Amendment right for speech. And, they were declared to be riots or to be in, that were not in line with what the atmosphere they wanted in the community at that time. So there was certain force used on these individuals. So we want to look at that. They should not be deemed as rioters. They are protesting or exercising their freedom of speech right, and they should not be treated as agitators or instigators unless they were in fact that. Also, another piece of legislation that has been considered is transparency with disciplinary actions against law enforcement officers. Right now, you don't know what the officer has been, found, what kind of conduct has been found in their background. So we want to make sure that it's transparent and that it follows them. Too often we see and hear about law enforcement officers who have acts of misconduct on their background, but then they are able to find another position at a different department. So this information needs to be shared with departments and the public. We need to know if we have a rogue law enforcement officer out there who has expressed or displayed hate. Those officers should not be allowed to be on the force. This is a privileged position, one that requires a lot of trust and respect. And if you're not going to treat it as such, then you do not deserve to be there. So that is something else. Of course, the duty to intervene, also requiring body cams to be on. And if you don't have them on, they must be punished or face some type of repercussions. That's a piece of legislation that Representative Carl Sherman is calling the Botham Jean Act, that would require officers to turn on their body cams when they are using them. Then, of course, we want to bring back that legislation that would limit the arrest for fine-only offenses. Austin already does this. There's a lot of departments that already do this, but we want to codify that. We want to make sure that officers are not arresting. We don't want another Sandra Bland situation where an officer is arresting somebody for a fine-only offense. That's like a traffic stop. It shouldn't escalate into that. And then also, Speaker Pro Tem Joe Moody had a bill last session that passed out of my committee that dealt with the dead suspect loophole. So what if somebody dies, a suspect dies during an interaction, that is something that the body cam is not available. So we want to be able to have that information available. So and on top of that, we also want to be able to create additional opportunities for law enforcement to have training in terms of if they have if they discharge the weapon, they should have additional training. Another thing is, how often do they discharge their weapon when you have an unarmed suspect? I don't believe the data is there sufficient enough for us to calculate that. So we need to be able to track that type of data as well. And then banning pretext stops. If you're going to stop somebody, it has to be for a reason. So I've just given you like a big snapshot of a lot of things that have been going on. I do fear that this pandemic has impacted education, learning in our schools. So we need to even look at that. That impacts criminal justice. So how Black and Brown students are going to be more disproportionately impacted by virtual learning just because of the circumstances that many of them live in. Many of us live in, even in my area, I have poor internet access. So just getting a hotspot is not enough. So, things like that, criminal justice and education, they blend in. And then, of course, making sure that we have additional mental health workers available to collaborate with law enforcement.
Thank you, Representative Collier, for that very complete answer. And it sounds like you guys have a really very detailed agenda of ways to move forward this session. And I think that's very welcome news to our viewers. We have several questions kind of about on the topic of mental health and law enforcement. So I'm going to try to kind of group these into one question that probably all of you have something to say about. And so, a lot of people have pointed out, for one thing, that, we've tried in some ways to have mental health diversion programs before that have sort of been in limited effectiveness. And right now we're seeing additional calls for the involvement of, mental health and social workers to be involved in policing, either to be part of police departments or to kind of replace some of the functions of policing. And, so some of the things that people have brought up are, for example, how ways to incentivize, these workers to be part of programs, to incentivize social workers and mental health professionals to be a part of this, ways to, to deal with people who actually might be violent, and then also ways to ensure that this population isn't being taken to jail just because they are having a mental health crisis. So I guess just in general, some of the challenges around implementing that larger mental health component to policing and ways to address that. And I'm sure all of you, again, might have some things to say about that.
Well, can I start real quick? Well, first of all, I want to thank the representative for talking about the Groundhog Day cops that go from department to department to department to department. I don't think people realize that you can have, and then I'll get to this mental health piece, it's really important. I don't think people realize you can have 2 dishonorable discharges in the state of Texas before they take away your TCOL license, your peace officer license. Now, I can't get a dishonorable discharge from the Army and then go join the Marines, or the Marines and then go join the Air Force. But in Texas, you can have 2. And so there's already an appeal process for your first dishonorable discharge. So if you lose your appeal and it sticks, then that should be it. You should not be able to go to another department. I think the argument is, well, some of these small cities are very political, and it's true. Some are very political, and officers can be, you lose their job because they refuse to do something that was not appropriate. But that's what the appeal process is for. So I'm glad that that's on the radar. But when it comes to mental health, we are actually here in Houston. I'm very proud of the fact that Ed Emmett, our last county judge, helped open the Ed Emmett Center here, where we are actually diverting a lot of folks. It's law enforcement diverting people that are in psychological crisis, and they do something that, historically they would have gone to jail. But instead, what we're doing is we're actually taking them to the Ed Emmett Center, where we're connecting them to different service providers, but most importantly, we're not getting them into the criminal justice system. And that's something that's really important. We actually have social workers and mental health professionals that go on calls with our folks and take the lead, where the officers are highly trained themselves, and they take a secondary role only for safety. You know why we don't have more of those? We should have those across the city and across the state on every shift and in every region of the city, every day of the year, every shift of the year. It's a funding issue. We're not funding to the extent that we should be funding these programs. And the problem is that people think that that somehow we take these calls away from the police department, that everything's going to go fine and dandy. What they're going to find that no matter who takes the calls on the front end and who responds, that we still don't have enough bed space. We don't have enough mental health institutions. We don't have enough drug treatment programs. So again, the shortcomings of police are but one cog. We have got a lot of failures to invest in this country that go well beyond policing. And I'm afraid that even when it comes to police reform, it seems like COVID has taken over. I don't even hear the Congress talking that much about it. And I can just tell you this, the Major City Chiefs Association, again, 69 largest police departments in the country, we will continue to push for reform, including looking at qualified immunity, not to get rid of it, because the problem is if you go too far, good luck in trying to find police officers, but to try to tweak it in a way where it's balanced, where officers don't become risk averse. Next thing you know, people are dying because they're not willing to do what has to be done to help keep people safe in terms of acting quickly. We look forward to this conversation, but again, pay attention to what's going on. It's already, in my opinion, already taking a back seat in the Congress, and that's a problem. So we all need to keep speaking out. Lastly, to Dr. Cantor and the Center for Policing Equity, I'm so proud of that organization because they take data and they look at some of the disproportionality in terms of police action and police conduct, but they go well beyond just the policing piece and look at the socioeconomic piece, look at the education piece, look at all the other things that have an impact. And I would challenge any police chief across the country. When I was in Austin, I was the first department, the first police chief that actually gave them access to all of our data, and with the agreement that they would publish the reports, Dr. Philatiba Goff, with attribution. We were the first department to do that. I'm glad we did it. And Doc can say that we're now doing the same thing in Houston. But the good thing about CPEs is that they don't look at just policing. They look at all the causative and contributory factors that what goes on across the nation and communities. Unfortunately, I have to jump off here in about 2 minutes. But again, if anybody needs anything, I'm easy to find. For you Rice students, remember, we are hiring at the Houston Police Department. And you know what? If you want to come into policing at a time where it's challenging, but it's a great opportunity to take us to the next level. I think in a lot of ways, as screwed up as things can be in policing, we're still ahead as a profession of a lot of places in society. This department is minority majority. We're reflective of this big melting pot. We're a homegrown department. And I can tell you there's Fortune 500 companies that wish they had the diversity up and down the chain that Houston PD has, and that as inclusive as we are. So thank you all for letting me be on. And Representative, I look forward to seeing you during the session.
Thank you.
I got a thumbs up.
Thank you, Chief Acevedo, for taking the time to join us. I'm sure everyone found your comments very informative.
Reach out at art.acevedo@houstonpolice.org for all the people on here if they have some follow-up questions that they have for me.
Thank you. I'm sure some people will probably take you up on that.
All right. Take care, guys.
All right.
Thank you, Chief. Katie, if I can follow up real quick on turning over mental health response to qualified mental health providers. There's a lot of concern for violence, right? I hear that quite often. I have great faith in our qualified mental health providers that, and here in Southeast Virginia, we use a lot of peer counselors, people who have overcome mental health issues. So they're familiar with the characteristics, behaviors of people in crisis, and they're able to de-escalate 99% of people in crisis and get them the services they need without the police being there sometimes, right? So I think a police officer in that situation who doesn't entirely understand mental health crisis, even me, I've done a lot of training in crisis intervention methods, but qualified mental health providers who do that for a living, right, who aren't cops, they're able to de-escalate situations 10 times, 20 times, 50 times better than police officers are. So that whole violent, I'm not buying into it. I think it could be handled by qualified people other than police officers. Now, there's some legislative issues involved with that, where at least in Virginia, if it's going to be an emergency custody order followed by a temporary detention order, that has to be carried out by law enforcement. So, but a lot of times people can be urged to voluntarily get services and take the police completely out of that cycle. So I just wanted to throw it in there that violence comes up a lot, but qualified mental health professionals can de-escalate it. And we use peer counselors often. They recognize the traits and characteristics and behaviors of people who are going deeper and deeper into crisis, and they're able to de-escalate it.
Thanks, Rob. And then Representative Collier, if you had anything to add on that point.
I'm just going to piggyback on what Chief Acevedo said. I've had the opportunity to visit quite a few law enforcement departments since I took chair of the committee, Criminal Jurisprudence Committee. And I noticed that some of them are already implementing that type of model. It's called the cahoots kind of model, where you have a collaboration with the social workers, the mental health providers, to address mental health issues. In Fort Worth, the city of Fort Worth, they already have a model in place. The city of Arlington does this as well, just like Houston does, where you have law enforcement working with local providers. But it is a cost, and there's not enough of these collaborations, especially in rural areas. I know here in Fort Worth, the fire department also goes out on homeless calls. So if you have somebody that's homeless, that's having a crisis, the fire department and mental health providers assist in certain situations. So these are more collaborations that we need to promote and help fund as we go forward. And that, can be a part of the defunding the police kind of, mantra, because that is taking money out of the law enforcement and putting it into the professionals that handle these issues.
Excellent. Representative, here in Southeast Virginia, I've answered thousands of mental health calls for service when I was a police officer, and very few were in affluent white communities, right? Or affluent Black communities, because they have healthcare, right? So the family takes care of it through the healthcare system, right? So at CPE, we consider that as an investment in Black and brown communities because they don't have healthcare, right? Not they overall, but a great many are hourly workers. They're living in poverty, at least in Southeast Virginia. So by giving them someone that's going to come to their house and treat their healthcare issues, treat the mental health issues, right? I don't see a downside to that. I really don't. And nothing you've suggested on the docket in Texas is unreasonable, right? None of that's outrageous. None of that's abolitionist. It's very reasonable things that all police departments should be doing in the 21st century. And I can't say enough good things about what you're doing in Texas. Thank you.
And so we have a couple questions that are also sort of related to this that extend to issues with police culture and violence and dealing with, either populations with mental illness or, drug use. And, Representative Collier, you had mentioned the issue, for example, like implicit bias training. And I think one concern that a lot of people have is that, we can have the training and things like implicit bias and de-escalation, but if there's not sort of this larger cultural change within departments, that training isn't only going to go so far, right? And it might only go to the people who already buy into a certain mentality that, they're supposed to be this more guardians of the public than like the warrior mentality where some segments of the public are viewed with hostility. And so what are ways that the departments can work to change that culture from within and really focus on helping officers to see themselves as, people who serve the public and are supposed to protect all segments of the public, including people who are homeless or who have mental illness?
Well, excellent question. It starts with recognizing that there is an issue and that you have, they said with Alcoholics Anonymous, they said, first you got to admit you have a problem. So people have to admit we all have some type of implicit bias within us. Growing up, we think that, we attribute certain qualities or we attribute something to a certain person or a group of people, just because that's how we were, it was ingrained into us. And we have to break down those things. We have to break them down, but you got to acknowledge that you possess it, that you have this implicit bias within you. And then when you recognize it, you have to be willing to make a change. So we have to start with the recruiting. We have to look at the type of people we are hiring to serve in these positions. Not everybody, again, deserves to be a law enforcement officer. So we have to look at who's being hired and then the training that's being provided. We have great ideas, but unless they're being implemented in the way that they were intended, they don't meet and fulfill the requirement that they were intended for. For instance, we said that students must be trained on how to interact with law enforcement. Well, we find out that the video that's been put out is between two white individuals, and it's a pretty much cordial interaction. Well, let's show what happens when you have a Black or brown individual who is approached by law enforcement. Show where it goes wrong. And so that was the whole intent of the bill, was to show different, diverse areas and situations, but it didn't do that. So that's something we have to come back and look at. So we can have all the greatest intent in the world, and unless it's implemented in the manner that it was intended, it doesn't have the effect that we would like for it to have. So yes, we do cultural bias training, but perhaps that's not enough. We also, are starting to do implicit bias training. So those are things that we can do, but it starts with, the hiring, recruiting and hiring, and going to different places for recruiting. We need to, branch out where we're trying to find law enforcement officers. There's been a push even by some legislative members that would require law enforcement to live in the communities in which they serve. Now, I'm not saying that that's going to pass, but that's been something that has been pushed because you want to make sure that the officers have a relationship equity, or they build relationship equity in that community.
Thank you, Representative Collier. And Dr. Kenter, if you wanted to add anything to that.
Yeah, let me just jump on that. And everything that Representative Collier said is absolutely correct. You got to start the hiring and recruiting process, and you have to reimagine what a good police officer looks like, right? Because you have gatekeepers in the recruitment process who, their vision of a squared away cop isn't what 21st century policing needs, right? You need smart people. You need people with a big heart, people that can talk to people. You don't do a lot of fighting really when you're a cop. I mean, you do a lot of talking, and we need people who can talk. But what can people do today within their departments? And I'll give a big shout out to Chief Boone in Norfolk. Full disclosure, he was my partner on and off for 30 years, so we're good friends. But he has made community policing, community engagement, procedural justice. He's made it part of the promotional process. So if you want to be promoted within the Norfolk Police Department, he's going to ask you questions about it. What have you done for your community other than put people in jail? He's incorporated that into the CompStat process. He asked his leaders, what have you done for the community? In addition to putting people in jail, what are you doing to reduce crime? Because there's other ways to reduce crime other than putting people in jail. So there's two things that, and when you start calling people out in front of their peers, they get on board real quick. So the promotional process and then the CompStat process, he's incorporated that, and it's worked fairly well.
Thank you, Rob. So we have time for just two more questions. So one point that's kind of been brought up and that I think is important to address is that a lot of the recommendations that you all have suggested here are policy changes that don't necessarily cost additional money, which is probably a really good thing, especially now because we're looking at these budget shortfalls in the face of COVID and the economic problems. And so related to that, I'm wondering about other ways that we can incentivize police departments to make some of these changes that either shift funding priorities around or don't necessarily cost money. And related to that, what kind of leadership we might ask from the federal government on this. Of course, policing is a local institution, but if there's anything that the federal government can do to assist with these efforts as well.
Okay, so in terms of the cost, yes, a lot of these things, they don't even require a legislative fix, or legislation, but we're going to do it because it's the right thing to do, and it's necessary. But there are departments like Dallas, Houston, Austin that have already proactively implemented some of the recommendations. Fort Worth, we have a police oversight, a race and equity type of committee that's been put together in response to some unrest in light of the misconduct that has been identified in Fort Worth. So, there are things that police departments can do proactively, and it could be a savings to them, just like with Dr. Kenter said, it could be a savings to certain departments to do this collaboration. So it can happen at the local level. I don't believe that it necessarily has to be a state law, but there are things that we can work together on to ensure happen. In terms of the federal government, the Congressional Black Caucus has released some recommendations that they have filed for policy that would make it, across the nation. They are very sound policies that we could implement. A lot of the things we've talked about at the federal level. I do believe that there has been some talk from the White House about incentivizing departments that would promote policies like working with healthcare professionals. So that's something, if you can get additional funding to do that, that's great. That's a great opportunity. But there's at least two policing reform bills that have been promoted and pushed at the federal level that are going on right now. And everyone, whenever there's legislation out there, if you even have an idea, please contact your representative. Contact your senator, your state representative, your congressional member, and let them know your position, because your voice and your vote matters, and they need to hear from you. I need to hear from my constituents because I'm supposed to be representing them, and the same for all the other elected officials. So it's important that you let your representative know your position on various bills and look them up, study them, and find out how they impact you going forward.
Thank you, Representative Collier. And Dr. Kinter, did you want to weigh in on that question at all?
No, I think Representative Collier did a wonderful job answering that, and I could, in no uncertain terms, could I add anything to that answer?
Well, and Representative Collier, you kind of got into the last question that I had for you all, which sort of relates to community police relations on reform. So we had several questions from people asking about Black Lives Matter and how the police can communicate with Black Lives Matter, and what residents can do to, have a say about, what role they want the police to have in their communities and what kinds of reforms they would like to see. So sort of in addition to, going and voting and contacting their local representatives, especially at the community level, what ways can individuals get involved in this process?
Various organizations have meetings. The city council meets. The city manager in my area is the one that deals with firing police and law officers. That city manager is going to be at the city council meetings. In Houston, it's different because the mayor is a strong mayoral system. So going to these meetings, now a lot of them are virtual, so you can interact from your own home. So making sure that you're aware, find out, when does your city council meet? Whoever is responsible for law enforcement oversight, then that is the person that you need to contact. One thing I didn't get into that dealt with the district attorney's office, prosecutorial discretion. We need to make sure that we have prosecutors in place who are willing and confident enough to go after those bad actors. Because if you continue to allow them to stay on the force, then you have more George Floyd's and Sandra Bland's, we just have so many other incidents will happen unless they go after these bad actors. So they can already go after them criminally, and we need to make sure that we have prosecutors in place. Find out who your prosecutor is. One thing that people may not know about, and they may know about it, but you can do ride-alongs with your law enforcement. They have programs in place that say, hey, come and see what we do. Do a day in a life. Find out what that program is and participate. I hear so many times from law enforcement officers that the community who participates, they pull the trigger more than they do. Well, let's see if that's true. But find out what it's like to be a law officer. And even in Tarrant County, our district attorney has a day in the life where you can come and watch the prosecutors. So I think that that's something that you can do to get involved, to find out more about the process and the policy that is impacting your life.
Thank you, Representative Collier. So that is all of the time for questions that we have today. I'm sorry that we didn't get to everybody's questions. So there's so many good ones that we had. I want to thank all of you for a great discussion. This webinar is going to be available online at the Baker Institute's website. If any of you watching would like to get in contact with me, my information is available on the website as well. And I invite you to reach out if you have any questions regarding drug or criminal justice policy, or if you're interested and getting involved in the Baker Institute. And as I mentioned, this is the second panel in a series of events that we're hosting that address criminal justice and racial equity in public health. And actually, Representative Collier, you touched on one of the events that we're going to have in September, which is on prosecutorial power and sentencing reform as well. And our next event will be on August 6th, where we will be discussing the impact of mass incarceration on women and their families. And I encourage all of you to join us for that event, as I believe will be another very worthwhile conversation. So again, thank you to all of you for this event.